a lot of times it's helpful, instead of being in sort of the thick of things, you know, like right now you can get caught up in the intricacies of the phone, PDA, MP3 war, but, you know, let's go back to maybe a simpler time and see if we can learn something from history on this. And an interesting one to look at, if you go back far enough, is what happened with the change from steam-powered factories to electrical power in factories. And what happened when you had steam-powered factories is, you know, you didn't have distributed steam power. I mean, you had a boiler in the basement that you fed with coal, and I looked for a good diagram, which I couldn't find, but you can see down here, you know, the way it worked is there's a boiler and the pulleys went all over the factory, and factories were organized kind of vertically. And if you go back and look at clothing factories in the early 1900s, for example, you see they're vertically oriented because you get the shortest run of belts. You know, the belts go down to the end, the boiler in the basement, and you get belts that go up 5 stories and, you know, over 3 stories, and the belts are kind of the shortest that way. And you couldn't have distributed steam processing. And what happened is when electric motors came out, and they were really, you know, dynamos, they just ripped out the big steam boiler, and they put in this big electric motor, and they hooked the belts and pulleys that they already had in place, they just hooked them up to the big electric motor, and it was the same kind of thing. But what happened over a period of about 20 years is that electric power got to be distributed. You don't have to have one giant, you know, electric dynamo. You can make a lot of little electric motors, and you can spread them around. And so what happened is, over 20 years, though, the plants, the physical, you know, 5-story high factories kind of got rebuilt, and, you know, factories tended to be much shorter, you know, 1- or 2-story factories, because you could spread that power out. You didn't have to have the big dynamo in the center and run belts and pulleys. You could put the power right where it was needed at the individual machines. And if you look at where we are now, the average car has more than 60 electric motors in it. And I'm sure, you know, you can't even count the number of motors that you would have in your car or in your home, for example. If you try and count how many motors are in your home, and you try and add up, you know, all the hair dryers and appliances and the furnace and, you know, the little motors that are in all different kinds of appliances, I mean, they are everywhere. So that's one example if we look back.